So, legal cannabis is a serious volume business now in many American states, but it's also still a serious challenge to properly bank the businesses that cultivate and sell cannabis products because cannabis remains illegal at the federal level. So, if you decide that cannabis business is appropriate for your credit union, you won't be alone. Hundreds of institutions are navigating these choppy waters today. FinCEN reports that as of year end 2020, 169 credit unions and over 500 banks serve cannabis businesses. So I'm excited to chat with Patrick Toohey today. He's the senior vice president at Allied Solutions about some of the most important opportunities and considerations in cannabis. So Patrick, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be here, Randy. Really excited about tackling this subject today and hopefully helping some people out there to gain some knowledge around it and how they might want to handle it going forward.
Absolutely. It's such a tough question. So let's jump in. For credit unions unsure about getting into the cannabis business, can you offer a litmus test for risk tolerance? And maybe, for example, like some have said that a credit union that's reluctant to deal with money remitters is not a good fit for cannabis. Do you agree?
Well, one of the biggest concerns when you're getting into banking cannabis is money laundering. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a significant concern. And so, when you rely on another party to take due diligence in handling this money and knowing where it's coming from and what it's produced from, I think there's definitely questions about how is that third party handling that kind of potential risk or exposure. So there's a lot of trust involved with a money remitter to determine, where is this coming from? Who is the parties or who are the parties involved? And is there a potential money laundering exposure here or concern? So I'm in agreement that, you have to be cautious about how many hands are handling a transaction and what kind of experience and expertise they have. And so I'm in agreement with being more cautious as opposed to relying on a remitter. And I know that there are some that do, but I do think that's a question a credit union needs to ask themselves.
Yeah, especially as part of I know there's a ton of due diligence in this aspect of the business. So that may be a
Yeah.
good fit for them. So, how does staffing and operating a cannabis program different from the standard everyday credit union operations and hires? Aside from hiring people who have already worked, within a cannabis banking program, maybe at a larger bank, is there a template for success?
Well, the one thing I would say right out of the bat is it's an education that involves so
Yeah.
much more than what you would be doing with a standard relationship. And for any credit union that's going to get involved in this, the staff and the employees who are overseeing these definitely has a higher demand of learning more about what is compliance look like.
Yeah.
What does knowing your member consist of? What are the state laws that are required, whether it be from the attorney general, whether it be from FinCEN, whether it be from, establishing a marijuana business policy. I mean, there are demands that are being put on staff and employees who are handling these transactions that are such that to say everything as standard or everything as business usual would be a significant mistake, Randy. And so, absolutely, the work required on the credit union's part to be able to make sure their employees are as knowledgeable as they can be and as aware of what's required as far as adherence to guidance before anything takes place is a very focused, diligent process that they should all be very cognizant of before they determine whether they're going to start handling transactions that are related to cannabis business. It's really nothing to play around with. And I will get into some other things involving it that would substantiate how important that would be when you're staffing your people to handle these kinds of transactions.
Sure. So one of the biggest challenges in cannabis banking is the huge volumes of cash. Because nationwide payment and electronic payment networks can't legally transact in cannabis, is there any immediate relief on the horizon? Maybe a processor that does allow it, or a fintech disruptor? We've talked over the last few years with many different fintechs out there
Yeah.
that are providing great services. Is
Yeah.
there, have you seen any that are out there that are maybe to reduce some of the cash handling requirements?
The major providers, I mean, I really don't see them until the Safe Harbor Act is passed. I don't see that that's going to change any, Randy.
Yeah.
There are going to be fintechs, I'm sorry, available. But at this point, I really don't see a major payment processor coming into play until Safe Harbor is passed. And so unfortunately, for the cannabis industry, that's not going to happen, I don't believe, anytime soon. So this continued struggle that they have in a cash business, and what they can and cannot do in respect to what they're receiving from the banking industry is going to be a continued difficult challenge until such time that I believe Safe Harbor does pass.
Yeah. So the requirement to file SARs on virtually every transaction with the cannabis business might catch some credit unions by surprise, but what other kinds of regulatory overhead and conversations await a credit union dealing with cannabis?
I think regulators are going to concentrate on a number of things. One being, again, how are you knowing your member, and are they state complied? Are they doing things that are required by the state to get into cannabis? I think the regulators are going to spend a lot of time talking about that. They're going to spend a lot of time talking about what kind of steps are and policies are in place in respect to money laundering, and how you're going about determining whether that's occurring or not. Are they in adherence to the guidance to FinCEN? Are they in adherence to the guidance in respect to the marijuana policy that they've put in place? A big concern in respect to where have you educated yourself, and how have you learned more than what's standard requirement in respect to banking cannabis? Where have you gone to vendors or outside resources to gain and garnish the expertise, so that from a regulatory perspective, you are very much in touch and have your thumb on what's required in order to be complied? So I do think there's going to be a lot of questions from the regulators when they come in and visit a credit union around the cannabis exposure, and to be able to be equipped and ready to discuss all of these steps that you've taken to demonstrate that you definitely have a handle on matters, that you are going to be able to, without question, handle a regulator's due diligence process around everything we're doing within our credit union to take care of these transactions that are cannabis related, and that we've gone to great length to understand everything that's involved in order to be in compliance, in order to have a regulator feel comfortable that we as a credit union have done everything we possibly can to protect our interests and lower our risk.
Yeah. So earlier this year, the NCUA took action against a credit union over its cannabis program. What lessons should credit unions
Huge
learn
lesson,
in this
huge
situation?
lesson, Randy. And so I've been doing this since 1999. Okay. And this is what I would tell credit unions that are looking to get into cannabis. There have been many products and services over the years that credit unions have gotten involved in that at some point or another may have caused financial strain on the credit union because they didn't do their homework as much as they needed to. They didn't either hire the expertise to handle the product or service, or the vendors that they contracted with did not have the expertise that they communicated they would be able to have in handling that kind of product or service, which ultimately caused the credit union to suffer. And what I can tell you, and what I can tell the credit unions out there time and time again, the regulators have been somewhat forgiving. They have kind of said, okay, bad decision, board of directors, bad decision officers, learned a lesson, let's move on, and so on and so forth. Never a regulatory action. This particular regulatory action tells me one thing: the regulators are not fooling around when it comes to cannabis banking. They're not fooling around. So if you're not adherent and you're not complying, this is significant because it's the first action a regulator has taken against a credit union for getting into a program that they were not up to speed on, that they were making errors, that they were not complying. And we are going to make an example of this. We're not fooling around. The other thing that might be of interest to those out there is how the insurance contracts react to a regulatory action. Because up to this point, that was never a concern. So to me, this is a big signal, Randy, that if a credit union, I don't mean to scare anybody off, because I do think it's something that a credit union should consider and look at banking cannabis, but it's just evidence that the regulators are not going to fool around when it comes to how you're handling compliance.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's certainly worth looking at and maybe even going down that path, but it's something you need to have eyes wide open as you go through that. We talked about this before, but some credit unions decide to establish a program or want to make sure they have a program in place only after they recognize that they're informally serving one or more cannabis businesses. Does that make it easier or even more risky?
I think it's more risky. I really do. Because you're going in with an approach of, we're not in this in any big way. And therefore, maybe we have less responsibility, or this thought of, and I'm not saying that's what they're saying, but
Sure.
Maybe we don't have to be as concerned. Well, I don't necessarily believe that the regulators are going to say, okay, only because you had two of them, we'll look the other way.
Yeah.
I just don't see that to be, there's such concern about money laundering. I mean, that's, again, the biggest issue. So whether you have one or whether you have thousands, I don't think it's any less risky if you're a credit union who is serving cannabis and banking, offering banking services to cannabis. I think you have to have your alarm up in respect to knowing what you need to know, educating yourselves, and making sure that you're complied, whether it's one or thousands. So the risk to me is the same, Randy. It really is.
So you mentioned the SAFE Act, the Safe Banking Act earlier, and it's once again receiving some congressional attention. Is now a good time to move forward or hang back and wait for clarity? Or as you mentioned, it's all part of the process of due diligence and coming up with a strategy that's right for your institution?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't hold your breath. If I'm a credit union out there. It could be a long way out before it becomes approved, accepted. And so therefore, should we wait? When is the best time to get in? Asking your questions around that, or simply, to me, I think there's an opportunity. Well, there obviously is an opportunity. There's a lot of credit unions who are banking cannabis, right?
Yeah.
So they see this opportunity to, create income. And I don't disagree with that in any way, shape, or form. And I do think there's some advantage. Obviously, there's risks when you're getting into something new, when you're trying to garner that expertise and determine your risk. And so, having said that, though, to position yourself right now to bank cannabis, because it's state approved and state legal, and you have the opportunity to do so, has some advantages down the road when at such time the things are approved and it becomes legal federally and things of that nature, and how you're positioning yourself. So I wouldn't hold your breath to wait for that right time. At the same time, I wouldn't be hesitant to look at getting into banking cannabis, as long as you do it the right way.
Yeah. So I want to close on this one because I know what we've talked about may feel like it might make cannabis banking more trouble than it's worth. But what are some of the positives of choosing to serve the cannabis business?
Well, I think there's three. I really do. And although I've said some things around, the risk involved, I don't want to dissuade anyone from considering it because I do think there's good reasons. So the one is there's income potential. There is income potential, and you should take advantage of that. And by all means, explore every avenue and option in which to do so. So I encourage credit unions to definitely understand that there's income out there to be made, in this industry for banking. The second is, and I believe it was the premise behind all of it is, and I'm wholeheartedly, community safety is important. It's important. And as long as the cannabis industry is being basically forced to take cash, to handle cash in the volumes that it's coming in, and the potential exposure to robbery, theft, violence, and things of that nature are nothing to look away from or pretend that there's not a real exposure related to it. So I do believe that is something that's extremely a positive when it comes to creating community safety. It's vitally important. The third is this, and maybe from a credit union perspective on positioning oneself to capitalize at a significant volume in the future. Any credit union right now who is established and is banking cannabis is, in fact, setting themselves up that should it become legal from a federal level, they're going to be so far ahead of the curve and ahead of the game than those that are going to want to jump in and take advantage of it. So if I could use the word patience, and I know there's a lot of investment in time, risk and worry, and all those things involved, but I will tell you the potential payoff, the positive impact that it could have for a credit union who gets in at the ground level, and should it take off, should it become legal, and what that means for you in respect to being ahead of the game, I think is going to be significant for those credit unions and a real positive reason to explore it right now.
Yeah, we're at that spot where it's incredibly hard for a financial institution because the consumers, it's all legal. It's no problem. It's already, we're going down this path. The states legalize it. There's a dispensary on the corner.
Yep.
But from a regulatory standpoint, it's still in the very early days of banking cannabis. And from our conversation, you can understand why it's important to remember that it's a large and expanding industry heading for an estimated 30 billion plus or more by the end of 2025. So some credit unions see pioneering this space as a way to help promote safety in their communities, like you said, by absorbing the cash, and others are pragmatically looking for unconventional fee revenue from businesses with limited options. I think I think a few just like the challenge as well and don't want to be told no. So this is a conversation we're definitely going to return to in the very near years to come. And I look forward to hearing how you guys at Allied are evaluating the risks and helping navigate the unusual requirements of this opportunity. So Patrick, thanks so much for being here today. It's been really great.
Appreciate it, Randy. Always love having the opportunity to speak with you guys and to speak to the credit union industry as a whole. Have a significant passion for our industry, and I'm very thankful that I had an opportunity to touch base on this topic. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
Okay, take care.